conference's third session on labor migration and development. I welcome the audience here in the room. I also welcome guests from far away, and you see Mr. Dilip Rata sitting, I guess it's back at home, Dilip, where you're sitting. That's now correct. In Washington. I guess it's late at night, so here it's early in the morning, as you can guess, and we're happy to see you from far away. We will have another participant also jumping in through Skype as well. Isn't it funny talking about migration and then having people from all over the world jumping in? I quite like this approach, actually. My name is Peter Bonin. I work for German Development Corporation, and let me briefly, by introducing myself, by introducing the panel, also show you a little bit about what we want to do in our session today. Yesterday evening was closed with a very, very interesting presentation and following discussion by the Honorable Mr. Montek Ahluwalia, and he showed to us and he described to us that in order to secure jobs which lead to development, certain and a whole row of important structural changes are needed. And I dared asking him, where's the migration issue related to jobs, related to labor? And what I took back from the session was he gave a strong message to that question. Well, this is rather the international side, our framework. This is other countries giving the framework, allowing people to travel and so on. We haven't had the discussion about what a country itself, having issues about labor, issues about jobs to be resolved, can do about this, about immigration, and we want to look into this today. Let me quickly jump through our agenda of today, of the session, and show you who we have and what is the little narrative we have in our session. Together with my colleague Pragya Taneja from our Competence in Motion unit here in GIZ New Delhi, we want to give you a very, very brief overview. What is this issue about migration and development from German Development Corporation side, and then jump into the more general, into the principles, let's say, about the nexus between migration and development related to remittances, related also to labor migration, being presented by Dilip Rata, the manager and of the Migration and Remittances Unit and the CEO of the Global Knowledge Partnership on Migration and Development at the World Bank in Washington. Right after that, unfortunately, Dilip, well, he will be available for questions and answers immediately after this, and for technical reasons, because we are so spread all over the world, we'll have the next participant jumping in via Skype directly afterwards, which is Binod Kathuria, professor at the Zakir Hussain Center for Educational Studies at the School of Social Sciences at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, actually here in New Delhi, but he's in the US as well, I guess. Is it the US? Yes. Binod will put the points more down to, of course, to India labor markets, to jobs, and the relation to migration and development in India. And to widen the discussion right afterwards, I'm very happy to have around Dr. Bilesha Veraratne from the Research Institute. She's a research economist at the Institute of Policy Studies in Colombo, and Bilesha will give us an overview on the experiences of Sri Lanka in the same relation. And to bind things together in the end, we're very happy to have Irudaya Rajan from the Center for Development Studies in Kerala here. So he will help us to foster the discussion afterwards and be our discussant afterwards. Now, a little bit, I was allowed to give you a little overview on how German development cooperation is looking into the issue of migration and development. And from a development organization's perspective, you will probably not be surprised that we are a little bit of an odd group within our development mainstream, to start with a very honest word. When I talk to a colleague out in the field working in practice on development cooperation, he asks me, what is this migration and development thing? Development is supposed to prevent migration. We are improving, we're trying to improve the living conditions in our partner countries, and in many cases a nice indicator for a project can be living conditions improved, less people have left the country. But we all know this is not the case as it is in reality in many cases. Once people start to earn more money, once people confront themselves with new knowledge and so on, actually with more development, more migration takes place. And the international community has understood this. Under Kofi Annan in 2006, a Global Commission on Migration and Development has started taking up its work and looking into actually the potentials of migration and the potentials that migration can have for development, which need to be supported. Along this line, German Development Cooperation has started thinking of what can we do to make best use out of the development potentials of migration. And I set up an institutional setup which brings together two important parts of it. Because migration is never a development issue alone, it's always related to jobs, it's always related more or less to labor when it comes to development. And in Germany we have set up an institutional cooperation between development cooperation and our federal labor agency. This is the Center for International Migration and Development, CIM. And the challenging part here is in an institution already working between two different policy fields. And this is what we try to do in our programs. And I will be pleased to hand over to my colleague Pragya to give you a little overview on what we do and exactly what it looks like at the program we do in India. Please.
Yeah, maybe you can have the video. So before we start with my little presentation,
you have that desire to make a real difference back home, to do something where you think, that was worthwhile, for me, for the people, for the country. Some 214 million people all over the world live outside their home countries. Nearly half come from emerging or developing countries. These migrants, with their wealth of knowledge and experience, have the potential to achieve great things in countries like Germany and even more in their countries of origin. This is why CIM, the Center for International Migration and Development, supports migrants in many different areas.
I think Germany is a good place to study, but somehow I always felt like it is not really the place where I fit in. I don't know, maybe it has to do something with the cold weather in Germany. I decided to come back home and work in Indonesia. I always wanted to give my community something back and use the know-how I had gained abroad in my own country. Today, I work as an advisor for the provincial government of Yogyakarta in Java. My assignment is to improve the institutional performance in the Department of Economy and Natural Resources. I support the staff in developing new capacities and ideas. I found this job through the German Returning Experts program. The advisor of the program in Indonesia has supported me a lot to settle down after my return. Without him, I probably would not have found a job where I feel like I can really make a difference.
I left Ethiopia for Germany when I was 12. I've been living in Cologne for 22 years now, so I feel at home in both Germany and Ethiopia. That's why I try to build bridges between the two countries whenever I get the chance. The association I founded with other Ethiopians 5 years ago is called the Ethiopian German Forum. We carry out specific aid projects in Ethiopia. We are deliberately looking to work with development organizations such as the Center for International Migration and Development, CIM. Like development organizations, we are very interested in helping our countries make progress. We all know we can best succeed by working together. One of our projects supports women in Ethiopia who have gotten into a hopeless situation. By offering them training to become hairdressers, cooks or secretaries, we give them a future. Last year I founded my own business in Morocco because I saw the great potential there, especially for new media. I set up online portals for a number of Moroccan cities. These portals report local news and give their users a chance to get involved in what's happening in their cities. I train young people. I teach them how to use the technology and show them the right way to present information. Finding reliable staff and the right partners isn't as easy as you think, since after so many years in Germany, I don't have the network I need in Morocco. This is why it was so important for me to get support from the Center for International Migration and Development. In Germany, I got advice on how to refine my idea. In Morocco, I then had access to valuable contacts and consulting services when I had to make important decisions. Without all of that, I never would have dared to set myself up on my own in Morocco.
CIM works with migrants who are keen to advance both themselves and their countries of origin. We inform and we advise. We hold events that bring the right people into contact with one another. We offer advanced training and financial support as well. We also advise governments that recognize the opportunities that migration has to offer and want to make better use of them. We have recently been helping the German government find experts outside of Germany for particular professions. In this context, we are looking for people in developing and emerging countries who want to get some work experience in Germany. Here too, our objective is to ensure that everyone benefits in the long run: the migrants, Germany, and the migrants' countries of origin. I want to do something for myself and for society. The opportunities are there. We just need to make use of them. If we don't do it, who will?
So I think that was a very interesting way to sort of enter the session this morning on a very lighter and interesting note, so that it allows us to really absorb what's coming in the next couple of minutes and maybe hours. Great. So once again, roundup. My name is Pragya Taneja, and I've been working with the German Development Cooperation here in India as the advisor in the area of migration and development, or migration and diaspora. My colleague Peter just gave you a little input about migration from the point of view of Germany and migration and development in particular. My little input will try to extrapolate what he has said regarding migration and development in Germany into also contextualizing it, in the Indian context and seeing what are we doing with migration and development, within the portfolio of GIZ in India here. Okay. So just to recapitulate, as Peter already introduced the CIM, we are actually a joint venture between the German Development Cooperation, the red logo that you see on the left, and the Federal Employment Agency of Germany that you see on the right. And our mandate is on behalf of the German government. We are into tapping the potential that global migration has for sustainable development, hence migration for development. I will be talking a little bit about the program that we just saw in the movie, and we thought that Germany is a very interesting case because personally I don't know of any other country that is doing so much in the area of migration and development by means of formal program implementation. So we thought we had a story to share, and hence we are sort of trying to present to you a global program as to what CIM has been doing in about 18 to 19 countries, including India. The program has 4 different pillars, if I may say. The first one is returning experts, and I think I'll delve into this a little bit individually in the next couple of slides, but you already got an idea in the movie, right? Where we are working with the group of young professionals and experienced professionals, highly skilled professionals basically. With regard to our second pillar, which is promoting migrants as entrepreneurs, we are trying to work with people who are potential entrepreneurs. And with the promotion of development activities of migrant organizations, we are trying to work with the diaspora, the Indian diaspora in this case, or the diaspora of various countries, developing and emerging countries who are there in Germany. And the last but not the least, which kind of did not get captured in the movie, is that we are working also with the governments of the respective countries in the area of migration policy advice. Very quickly, what are the actors when we're talking about returning experts? Now, in this particular case, returning experts are highly qualified professionals from developing countries who are currently living in Germany and who wish to come back to their home countries in order to implement or in order to work in the areas of development as a whole, brain gain, innovation, anything to do with the country's development, so to say. Just to kind of give you an idea about why, and what is in it for all the actors that are involved in this. If you look at the partner countries of Germany, of course, this means brain gain. This means capacity development. For Germany, of course, it's a great chance to further its international economic and scientific cooperation with the partner countries. For the organizations where these people work as returning experts, they actually get access to the know-how and knowledge or expertise that might not necessarily be available in the domestic job market. And for the expert himself or herself is a chance to meaningfully come back and implement, engage themselves with meaningful work, which sort of gives them a chance to, fruitfully apply their own skills. And the program actually tries to support them in different ways, both financial and non-financial. What we are trying to do with this program is that we offer mainly advisory support for the job sector, in partner countries. We also help them with finding jobs, so placement is a big goal. Networking and training is also something which we provide once they are back already in the country. So the relationship goes on, even after they are back. And for the financial part, we also have some components, mainly the salary top-up program, which is sort of a, like a bridge, so that sometimes people just don't come back because of remuneration issues. And after investing so much time abroad and living abroad, spending a lot of money and resources. I think people come back with certain expectations and not necessarily they are met when they come back and work with SMEs or NGOs, etc. So in those cases, we also, very sort of in those very justified cases, we try to offer some financial assistance for a limited period so that this transition for them to come back into their home countries gets very smooth. Just to give you an idea, this is the global picture of the returning experts we placed in 2013. We had 408 experts that we placed worldwide. The areas are interestingly, the biggest area, as you can see, is the sustainable economic development, the private sector development, followed by democracy and good governance, and also a lot of people working in the environment policy and natural resource management area. This, you can see a little bit of a bird's eye view on what are the countries that we are promoting, return migration or supporting return migration in. I will not delve too much into each of these other components, but very quickly, as you saw in the movie anyway, we are trying to work with also entrepreneurs who want to come back and start a new business related to development of their own countries. The idea being, of course, business innovation, know-how transfer, employment, and bringing of fresher perspectives in the partner countries. And the idea is that one provides support to these entrepreneurs before they leave Germany in terms of fine-tuning their business plan, and when they come to their partner countries, also hand-holding in terms of finding business partners or making financial institutions more accessible, etc. Basically the kind of stuff that people who have been living abroad for a long time, when they come back, of course they come with no information at all, and it might take 6 months, 7 months to find the best bank which offers the most reasonable loan rate. So those kind of things are served, so to say, on a platter with this program. It's basically a referral or a counseling-based program. And last is the Migrant Organizations Program, which is looking at promoting the development activities of organizations in Germany that are legally registered and has a minimum of 50% of people who are of migrant origin on board of the organization. Now, if these organizations, like you saw in the movie, the Ethio-German Connect, if these kind of organizations, by virtue of being in Germany, want to do something, for the country, they can still do so by, by being in Germany and not coming back necessarily as returning experts or coming back as entrepreneurs. So this is something which is, another interesting program which caters to that group which wishes to stay on and yet meaningfully engage with the development in their own countries. And CIM does offer a little bit of financial assistance for these projects to both the organization which is registered in Germany and a counterpart organization in the home country. Together, develop a project and implement it in the area of development, so to say. And last is the migration policy advice, which is where CIM has been also working with the German ministries as well as the ministries of partner countries on issues related to migration policy. It could be EU mobility partnerships, it could be remittances, it could be mainstreaming migration into development activities, or be it diaspora engagement. So these are the broad areas where we also try to work together with the governments of the partner countries. Extrapolating this into the Indian context, we have, if you look at the figures, this is what the Indian Embassy page says, figures are from 2013. People holding Indian passports out of this 110,000 people of Indian origin in Germany, most actually hold German passports. So this is quite an interesting, analysis. And the students are actually about a little bit more than 7,000, which I'm sure has increased, in this year also. What people are doing is that 1/3 of the professional or the students group is actually doing PhD, and most of them are engaged in engineering sciences, natural sciences, and social sciences, and law and economics follow a close third. Right now, or before right now, I think I should just quickly tell you the estimate of how many people have been promoted in India through the program. Since 1994 to 2013, we've promoted about 330 returning experts. I joined in 2011, and since then it has been a very, of course, a very, how do you say, a figure of about 40 odd people. But the 300 number that you see is also because we promoted a lot of nurses who came back from Germany to Kerala back in India. Those were the days when we did not have an advisor in India. So the demand was still so strong, and people were still coming back by coordinating and applying with the head office in Germany, although there was nobody to advise them in India. The current portfolio of returning experts in India includes 18 people at the moment, and we have 2 more joining us next month. Most of them are in the environment sector, and 5 of them are in the energy sector, and 2 in the SED sector, the Sustainable Economic Development sector. Interestingly enough, these are also the areas of GIZ in India, so this is where we try to integrate them, so that they can also work in areas of GIZ and be part of the Indo-German development cooperation. And last slide would be, this is just to kind of give you an idea where are these people working. So this is where our portfolio is kind of diverse in terms of the number of organizations, in terms of kind of organizations. You have NGOs and you have private sector organizations, and you have even research organizations, universities. So it's a gamut of organizations. And yeah, just to give you an example, my very good friend and colleague Ali, who has been quite instrumental in organizing this event here, is also one of the experts through the program who's working with ICRIER. So that's just to kind of give you a roundup of what we are doing currently in India. We're trying to get active in various areas that we saw in the first slide. Our main block is the first one, where we are active in India, but we're also already doing a lot of stuff in the last 3 areas where the reason why we did not include them in the presentation is because, well, I mean, we don't have a formal product to introduce to you. So, but it's already in the stage of, evolution. So that's happening already. So yeah, the number is small, the scale is small, but we thought the experience was nevertheless, worthwhile to share with you all in the session because, yeah, I think it could, we could humbly say that it has a potential to be replicated, perhaps. Thanks, and that's it from my side.
Thank you, Pragya. On our little journey through our subject, we come from the very practical approach. We want to try to go now on a more general and a more principle level. But what I would like to add to what Pragya just described is that the understanding behind this kind of a program is the understanding of migration as a fundamental human right, of taking your way to the place you want to be, and to be in the place, to live your life, to have your job in the place you want to be. And in the meantime, the idea of the program to make best use out of this, let's say, free-floating system of energy of migration, to say those who want to return get support, those who do not want to return but want to give support to their country of origin get support in another part of the program. So the program tries to reflect the general approach of saying migration has potentials for development. Now let's switch to the more principal issues, and I hand over to Dilibrata, please.
Thank you, Peter. It's great to see many known faces there, even though from a far distance, and it's my loss that I'm not there. Just a quick check. Are you able to see the slide, and are you able to hear me all right?
Yes, we are, Dilip.
Thank you. So I will try to quickly run through 3 key messages. The first point, which has been emphasized already, labor migration is integral to development. It is not something whether you can ask questions about whether it is good, bad, but it is really essential to development process. The second point I wanted to make, the message I want to leave you with, is that migration has huge development impacts on poverty, on health, on education, and in the context of the global discussion on post-2015 development agenda, we ought to include reducing the cost of migration and reducing the cost of remittances. The cost of migration would include all sorts of things, including passport cost, visa cost, but in particular, we ought to try to reduce the cost of recruitment for low-skilled workers. That would actually have huge positive impact on poor people. The third message is again related to the post-2015 development discussions. We often don't think about migrant resources as anything other than people and labor resources, but actually migrant resources through remittances, through diaspora bonds, through even recruitment cost reduction can translate into huge amounts of financing for development. So these are the three key messages that I will try to develop in my presentation. I just want to make sure that I don't exceed the time limit, so I'm trying to keep a watch on it. On my first point, that migration is integral to development, I think it's a very obvious point. Imagine any sector growing faster than other sectors. People will have to move at some point from lagging sectors to leading sectors. And that would often mean people moving from one place to another. And of course, we often think of that as domestic migration or internal migration within the country's border. And India is a great case for that. But also often that would lead to migration out of the country to other countries as well. And on that one, a couple of facts. International migrants are estimated at 232 million. That's sort of the official figure for 2013 from the UN Population Division. But that number is definitely a bit higher. And internal migrants, domestic migrants that is, they number about 750 million or so. So we are talking about 1 billion people in the world, 1 out of 7 people in the world as migrants. And again, most of the migrants, 93% of international migrants and probably a higher percentage than that for internal migrants are economic migrants. They are migrating for finding a job. And because they're migrating to find a job somewhere, if they find a job, they stay. If they don't, then often they actually come back. They come back if the market is reasonably frictionless, the doors are not closed. If the doors are closed on either way, they may not come back. But the simple point is that if they find a job after migrating, they stay, and in that case, they are providing a service on a market basis to someone who needs it, so it is a win-win. They provide the service, somebody benefits, pays the price, these people earn money, some of which they send back home, and the family also benefits. I hear some noise. Are you able to hear me all right?
We hear you well and try to get over the noise, yes.
Okay, so the second point then is the economic migration actually dominates the total number of migrant or the whole phenomenon of migration. And the third stylized fact in the context of migration and development ought to be that south-south migration, that is migration from developing countries to other developing countries, is actually larger than migration from developing countries to high-income OECD countries, the so-called North. And an example of that would be migration within South Asia, or migration in Sub-Saharan Africa, or migration in Central Asia. And again, this is an obvious point. South-South migration is larger than South-North migration, which means developing countries like India ought to be thinking about immigration, out-migration, as much as they ought to be also thinking about immigration or inward migration. By the way, that ought to include also discussions explicitly about domestic migration, which in the context of large countries like India is set to grow in humongous, very, very large numbers. And I don't see that sort of discussion taking place about domestic migration and the potential to harness the benefits and the need to minimize the damage that are often caused by migration to migrants and to their families. So these are three stylized facts I wanted to leave you with. And again, a striking factor when you are thinking about the long term, let's say another 30 years or 40 years into the future, we are talking about maybe 1.5 billion people joining the labor force in Asia and in Africa. And I don't think we can find jobs for them only in their own countries, in the country of the people. Some of the migration has to be international migration, and we ought to be prepared for that. Again, the point, we ought to be prepared for both emigration, that is out migration, as well as immigration, inward migration. We have to have policies for both. And countries like India, which are now aspiring to grow even further, India would need immigrants or migrant workers from outside as well. We ought to be prepared for that. The same applies for countries like China. Some facts on migration from India. 14 million people are considered to be out of India. Indian origin people are outside India, according to some official statistics. This number, I believe, is a gross underestimate. And yet, you can see that Indians are really spread out all over the world. One fringe benefit of the diversification is that, when there was a global financial crisis in the US and in Europe, India really did not lose that much in terms of shocks through the migration channel or through the remittance channel because of the diversification of migration. And this is an important point. We ought to continue to diversify the destination for Indian migrants. And by the way, also in terms of when we are thinking about immigration, sources of immigrants as well. The top destination countries for India are the UAE, United States, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan shows up because of the definition of foreign born as migrants. I don't believe that migration to Pakistan is that high, but there is migration to other countries in the Gulf region in particular, but also to high-income OECD countries. A few quick facts about migration and post-2015 development agenda. In the interest of time, I'll just skip a couple of slides there. There are several channels for links between migration and development in the country of origin. Remittances, philanthropic contributions from the diaspora, investment and entrepreneurship by diaspora members, skill transfers, as you heard from GIZ, knowledge and technology transfer, again we heard about that, the trade promotion, tourism, and then values and advocacy. I'm not going to talk about most of these. I'll focus on remittances and on investment and entrepreneurship. But I wanted to leave you with just one impression about values and advocacy, how important they can be. Think about Mahatma Gandhi. He was a migrant. Remittances are one of the most tangible and perhaps the least controversial among the links between migration and the development of countries of origin. And in 2014, by the end of the year, we expect remittances to developing countries to reach about $435 billion US. That would look like, as you might see this in the chart, about 3 times to 4 times the size of official aid flows to developing countries as reported by OECD Development Assistance Committee. A remarkable fact about remittances to developing countries is their stability over the time periods, over time, and even during the peak global financial crisis of 2009, we had a 5% drop in remittances to developing countries. Contrast that with a 40 or 50% drop in foreign direct investment and in fact, almost a turning around of private debt and equity flows. In the context of India, these figures are even more striking. The red line again shows remittances to India, $71 billion this year. That is the expectation. Actually, expectation is slightly higher. 71 billion is for 2013. And you can see that remittances after the global financial crisis, after 2008, are by far larger than foreign direct investment, which is falling and volatile. Official development assistance is almost negligible now, and private debt and equity flows, you never know what is going to happen with them. So remittances are actually very important for countries like India, and of course, you might not have noticed it, but remittances are now larger as a source of foreign currency than revenue from IT exports of IT services. So a couple of things about remittances, and that relates to the development impact of migration. This is a kind of private aid that actually works. It reaches the people who need them at times when they need them. So remittances have a significant impact on poverty reduction, and that's what we saw in the case of Nepal, where poverty rate fell between 1995 and 2005 by 11 percentage points, and most of that fall was actually because of, not most, but about half of the fall in poverty headcount ratio was because of remittances coming in. Actually, significant of remittances came from India, another poor country, as you might say, or south-south migration. Remittance recipient families have a lower school dropout ratio for their children. That was found in El Salvador. It was also found in Mexico, in Sri Lanka, that the birth weight of children who receive remittances, birth weight of children in households that receive remittances is higher than the birth weight of children of other households. Remittances are known to have very good positive impact on health outcomes, which of course means better outcomes in terms of human capital formation and long-term growth. So these are some of the important characteristics of remittances or migration, impact of migration and development through the remittance channel. It is worth noting, that the cost of sending money is still very high, even in the context of India, where costs are actually lower by international standards. To send money, $200 from France or Germany to India still costs over 12%. So you send $200 and somewhere around $25 would be actually just drained in terms of fees paid to the money transfer companies. Of course, when costs are high, money goes underground and nobody benefits. So this is something that we are taking up in the context of the policy agenda to reduce remittance costs. And G20 also has picked up, and I noticed that India was quite vocal in the G20 context to facilitate remittances and reduce the cost of remittances as well. Globally, the cost of sending money is 8%. In Africa, it is higher, 12%. Within Africa, it is even more than that. And countries where there is exchange control, the costs are absolutely prohibitive. But what is really worrisome in my view is when countries, even like India, completely ban outward remittances, even though we know that there are a large number of immigrants from different neighboring countries in India. We should not have that head in the sand mentality. We should actually just allow outward remittances. I think that would be economically very meaningful. It is their money. They ought to be able to send it out of the country if they wanted to. If we reduce remittance costs, we would have huge amounts of savings. And there are three major steps we can take to reduce remittance costs. Relax regulations for small remittances under $1,000, recognizing that small remittances are not money laundering. These are mostly for economic purposes, for human purposes, for personal purposes, and we don't want to worry about or overly worry about money laundering regulations and start closing the bank accounts of money service businesses. We need to relax regulations for small remittances. This applies to India specifically as well. The second policy recommendation would be to abolish exclusive partnership between post offices in general, national post offices anywhere in the world, and especially also in India, and a money transfer company, a leading money transfer company, whichever that happens to be. We need to open up the partnership between post office networks, between State Bank of India type networks, national banking networks, because we ought to be able to provide the cheapest service, the best service, the most convenient service for our clients, not be stuck with one money transfer company, which would then have the monopoly power and keep prices high, and our own people will have problems sending money to themselves or to their own family members. That does not make any sense. That's a regressive tax on poor people. That is not good at all. And one way to deflate the market, disrupt the market, is to actually go out and create a non-profit remittance platform that would serve money service businesses while allowing them to comply with all sorts of regulations all over the world. If we reduce remittance costs from somewhere around 8% to 1% globally, then we are talking about an annual saving of about $30 billion in the hands of poor people, poor migrants. That $30 billion actually compares very well with aid flows. Entire bilateral aid flows to Africa is lower than that amount. The aid budget of US government, the largest donor on the planet, is about the same size as the $30 billion. Actually, the saving would be larger than the $30 billion because remittances are used for aid, trade, and investment purposes as well. Besides reducing the cost of remittances, I am now talking about the post-2015 development agenda. As you know, we ought to be thinking about reducing the cost of recruitment for low-skilled workers in the construction sector, in the agricultural sector, and in the domestic service sector, like people who are going and working as domestic servants in their employers' houses, for example, in the Gulf region. And some potential goals that we can think about are reducing the cost of remittances, reducing the cost of recruitment for low-skilled workers, protecting the rights and safety of migrants, and finally, I'll be talking about that next, about financing for development, harnessing the migrant resources for financing for development. So,
Dilip, may I remind you of keeping the time, please, in order to have time for some questions and answers as well.
Sure. 2 minutes?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Peter. So, on the point about mobilizing migrant resources for financing for development, which is, by the way, the next round of conversation at the UN level in the development community that is beginning now after post-2015 development agenda or in connection with that. And there is a big meeting of the financing for development in Addis in July. In that context, we ought to pay attention to diaspora financial resources or migrant resources. And the channels, of course, are remittances. You know, for India, it is $71 billion, larger than IT exports. But there are other channels like diaspora saving, diaspora philanthropic contributions. There are ways in which you can mobilize remittances to use them as collateral to reduce borrowing costs on international bond placements, and recognizing remittances and diaspora financing, access to diaspora saving, diaspora financing in creditworthiness analysis. Sovereign creditworthiness analysis can actually greatly improve the sovereign ratings as well of countries like India, countries like actually any country that receives large amount of remittances. And then finally, recruitment cost reduction will also generate savings. So on the point about diaspora saving, think about it this way. Indians probably have, Indian diaspora has about $42 billion of saving annually, which is mostly parked in foreign currency bank deposits in foreign countries, in destination countries, and those deposits are giving you 0% interest rate these days. So if India were to offer a bond, 5 years bond, and give 4% interest rate, and say that that bond would be used to finance railways, bullet train systems, infrastructure, airports, even schools, I think the diaspora members, Indian diaspora, would be very interested in investing in those bonds. And India has done it with the Resurgent India bond, with the India Millennium Deposit. It has raised about $9 billion in the past. It can do that better this time, and there are ways in which it can be done better. I really think countries like India ought to think about mobilizing diaspora savings for their countries' infrastructure development plans in particular, but in general for development financing. I won't talk about future flow securitization of remittances. I can take questions if there is more. Just a point about recruitment cost, and I would end. A Bangladeshi construction worker going to work in the Gulf countries often pays about $4,000 to $5,000 to labor agents. These are agents who find them the job. For a job that pays less than $2,000 per year. What that means is somewhere around 24 months to 36 months or even higher or even longer, for 2 years, for 3 years, the construction worker is earning money only to repay the recruitment agent for the recruitment cost. And the family doesn't get to see any of the remittances. And by the way, all of that cost is most likely illegal, and that ought to be zero. So if you reduce that cost from 4,000 to zero, for every 1 million migrants, you are talking about a saving of about $4 billion. We don't know how many such migrants are out there, low-skilled migrants who are paying that fee annually. If it is 10 million people paying that fee annually, then you're talking about a saving of $40 billion in the hands of poor people. So that's basically sort of the points I wanted to make. And let me end there by saying that migration is an integral part of development, and it ought to be a part of the post-2015 development agenda. And in addition to thinking about migration for its development impact or as a source of, as a way of creating jobs, we ought to be also thinking about mobilizing remittances and diaspora savings for financing for development as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dilip. As I explained beforehand, due to technical reasons, we'll have a first short question and answers round separately, exclusively with Dilip Rata, and afterwards with the rest of the panelists. So please, the floor is open to questions for or comments for Dilip. I learned for moderation it's good to grilling the audience a little bit to find ideas about questions and answers, but if it's not the case, there is one, and please.
Hello. I'm Srija, I'm from Planning Commission. I have two questions to ask. One is India's working population is going to increase in the coming decades. So do you visualize more of out-migration from India, and or will India be able to absorb its skilled workforce? That's question number one. And you were talking about the high cost of recruitment in out-migration. That you cited an example of Bengal, but it's happening within India also. Like if in particular in Kerala, there are many nurses who are going to Kuwait and other Gulf countries, and they are paying the agencies in lakhs. They borrow money from the banks, and then they go there, take loan from that hospital or concerned agency, and then repay the Indian banks. Now, what policy do we have to check this kind of high cost in recruitment, which is going to the illegal sources? That's it.
We collect another question. We have two more.
I've got two questions. You mentioned the reduction in poverty in Nepal, and I was just going to say that one thing that gets me, I'm from Nepal, and one thing that I really fear is the over-reliance on remittances and the susceptibility of the economy to external shocks because of the over-reliance on migration and the concurrent remittances inflow. The other thing is one issue that is often talked about in the case of Nepal is the use of remittances for what is called the unproductive sector. So people using remittances for to meet daily consumption. And one side of the story, of course, is these poor people who are unable to find employment opportunities or sustain their livelihoods within the country are going abroad to fulfill their daily needs. So why should the burden of the country's development be put on their shoulders in addition to the hardships that they are already facing? And the other is, of course, the deaths and other kinds of abuses and exploitations that you often hear about. In the case of Nepal, the statistic says that there are, on an average, 4 dead bodies that arrive Nepal every day from the Gulf countries. So your thoughts on that, please.
We have 2 more questions, one over there in the last row, and then a last one. And maybe you can keep yours then also back for the overall discussion. Last row, and then also from our discussant, Irudaya Rajan. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Nisha Arunatilaka from the Institute of Policy Studies in Sri Lanka. I was interested in your finding that remittance receiving countries, you saw improved health outcomes and education outcomes. We at IPS, we conducted a study, and actually we found that there was no difference in terms of education outcomes and mobility outcomes for remittance receiving households and the others. I'm just wondering that why that could be, because our thinking was that although these households receive remittances, they don't have the guidance of the parents and so on and so forth. That may have a negative effect on the health and education outcomes of children. The second question I have is of the recruitment cost. Actually, in Sri Lanka, we are experiencing a different phenomenon where actually the recruiters are paying the migrants before they depart to encourage them to go for work outside, which is also a problem because oftentimes the migrant workers then don't have control over their remittances. Their families would be using it because they receive this upfront, especially in the case of domestic workers. And that is a greater incentive for them to go, although maybe rationally thinking they might not get many benefits from migrating. So that is a concern that the Sri Lankan government is looking into also.
Dilip Rajan here. I just want to ask, basically a simple question, not to Dilip, is that we are talking too much about remittances impact on development. In the process, we are forgetting the migrants. I think this is something true with the Indian context, many country contexts. We are only talking about money, but we are not talking about the persons behind the money to integrate into policy matters. And what you think, how we can impress upon the policy maker to talk about migrants, not just remittances.
This was a tour de force of questions to you, Dilip. If you can, if you're able to make it short, please.
Thank you. I'll try my best. I think these are excellent questions. The first one about whether there'll be more migration from India. Definitely there'll be more migration from India to outside, and within India itself, domestic migration, and also there'll be more immigration into India. I mean, this is absolutely a process of development. migration and sectoral transformation, migration and development go hand in hand, and there'll be always that churning, if not anything. But when you have some sectors growing faster than others, there will be people movement, and that is bound to grow. There are other reasons as well: the demographic factors, the cost factors, the recruitment, the information flow factors. They are also all pointing in the direction of more migration flows and not less. On the question of high recruitment costs and related questions also that came from Sri Lanka, I'm not so much worried about the costs for high-skilled migrants, although we ought to worry about them as well. In terms of priority, in terms of degree of importance or urgency, I think there is really urgent need to now begin to intervene in the case of low-skilled workers. They're extremely vulnerable. Construction workers from all over the region. So it's not only Bangladesh. I just cited the example. Nepalis are also vulnerable. Indians are also vulnerable. And you hear stories of like people from Punjab migrating to New York and paying $40,000, $50,000, $70,000, I have even heard, to smugglers. And that at some point is recovered by the labor agents, the recruitment agents who are operating illegally, and they are actually criminals. And that criminal element has to go. That criminal element of criminality also has to be eliminated from skilled migration. What can we do? I think the very sort of immediate step is to have a set of, code of conduct and regulations for the recruitment agency, and you have to implement those regulations. You have to also talk to the migrants so that there is information flow. If there is abuse, there ought to be a way of knowing that there is abuse and there is criminality going on, and of course, there is that nexus between regulators and the illegal recruitment agencies that has to be also cut. Corruption has to be addressed. So these are some concrete ideas for reducing recruitment cost. Of course, if you reduce recruitment cost, you will have a whole lot of abuse of migrants kind of